Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. I've been doing a bit of thinking recently about liberalism and whether or not liberals have kind of changed the way that they think recently, let's say within the last 10 years or so, or if they're just maybe more bold, or maybe they are they're willing to share and willing to show what they really think more now, and they're more emboldened to do so than they were in the past. And I came across a really fascinating article here in my research, and this one was written by William Voegeli back in October of 2014. So yes, this was almost a decade ago, believe it or not, 2014. And I think it gives us a little bit of insight into what I'm just talking about. He writes this. He says, 4 years ago, I wrote a book about modern American liberalism. It's entitled Never Enough, America's Limitless Welfare State. And it addressed the fact that America's welfare state has been growing steadily for almost a century and is now much bigger than it was at the start of the New Deal in 1932 or at the beginning of the Great Society in 1964. In 2013, the federal government spent $2.279 trillion. That's $7,200 per American, 2/3 of all federal outlays, and 14% of the gross domestic product on the 5 big program areas that make up our welfare state. Number 1, Social Security. Number 2, all other income support programs, such as disability insurance and unemployment compensation. And number 3, Medicare. 4, all other health programs, such as Medicaid. And 5, all programs for education, job training, and social services. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second. Again, this was a decade ago. And if we go, to 2024, which was exactly a decade ago, okay, and the fiscal year 2024, the combined spending of just 2 of those 5, okay, we're talking about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, just those 3 things, and he combines Medicare and Medicaid together into one. If we look at what that spending is now, it's almost 45% of the total federal budget. Okay, that we're talking $3.2 trillion just from the federal government. Okay, we're not talking about state or county or city or whatever else, local government type stuff. We're talking just the federal government, $3.2 trillion today. That has significantly gone up since he wrote this, but let's continue. So he says that amount has increased steadily under Democrats and Republicans during booms and recessions. Adjusted for inflation and population growth, federal welfare state spending was 58% larger in 1993 when Bill Clinton became president, when it had been 16 years before when Jimmy Carter took oath of office. By 2009, when Barack Obama was inaugurated, it was 59% larger than it had been in 1993. So it grew another 59%. Overall, the outlays were more than 2.5 times as large in 2013 as they were in 1977. The largest Census Bureau data from 2011 regarding state and local programs for social services and income maintenance show additional spending of $728 billion beyond the federal amounts. So he goes even into some of this local type stuff. Thus, the total works out to some $3 trillion for all government welfare states expenditures in the U.S., or just under $10,000 per American. That was at that time, okay? We're way beyond that now. That figure does not include the cost considerable but harder to reckon, of the policies meant to enhance welfare without the government first borrowing or taxing money and then spending it. I refer to laws and regulations that require some citizens to help others directly, such as minimum wages, maximum hours, and mandatory benefits for employees or rent control for tenants. All along, while the welfare state was growing constantly, liberals were insisting constantly it wasn't big enough or growing fast enough. So I wondered 5 years ago, he says, whether there is a Platonic ideal when it comes to the size of the welfare state, whether there is a point at which the welfare state has all the money, programs, personnel, and political support it needs, thereby rendering any further additions pointless. The answer, I concluded, is that there is no answer. The welfare state is a permanent work in process, and its liberal advocates believe that however many resources it has, it always needs a great deal more. The argument of never enough was correct as far as it went, but it was incomplete. It offered an answer to two of the journalist's standard questions. What is the liberal disposition regarding the growth of the welfare state? And how does the outlook affect politics and policy? But it did not answer another question. Why do liberals feel that no matter how much we're doing through government programs to alleviate and prevent poverty, whatever we are doing is shamefully inadequate? Mostly, in my book, he says, my book didn't answer the question because it never really asked or grappled with it. It showed how the progressives of a century ago, followed by New Deal and Great Society liberals, worked to transform a republic where the government had limited duties and powers into a nation where there was no grievances the government could or should refrain from addressing, and there and and were no means of any responding to those grievances lie outside the scope of government's legitimate authority. So, in other words, what he's saying is that there's the liberal way of thinking is that there's no limit to the fact to government's growth. There's nothing restraining it from continuing to grow bigger and bigger as long as they're seen as compassionate. He says this implies at least an answer to the question of why liberals always want the government to do more, an answer congruent with decades of conservative warnings about how each new iteration of liberal project is one more paving stone on the road to serfdom. So, in other words, conservatives have been ringing the warning bell for a long time about this growth of government because it's only going to make put everybody in poverty. Well, except the liberal leaders who dole out the money, right? Readers could have concluded, he says, that liberals are never satisfied because they end up every morning thinking, what can I do today to make government a little bigger? And the patch of ground where people live their lives completely unaffected by government power and benevolence a little smaller. And maybe some liberals do that. Perhaps many do. The narrator of The Shadow, a radio drama that ran in the 1930s, would intone at the beginning of every episode, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" I remember that. Well, The Shadow may have known, but I don't. He says the problem with this kind of explanation for liberal statism is that very, very few liberals have been compliant or foolish enough to vindicate it with self-incriminating testimony. Maybe there's too shrewd to admit that even bigger government is what they seek above all else. Or maybe they don't realize that's what they're up to. Now, I want to stop here and say that's not really an issue anymore. 10 years later, liberals are not shy about what they want. I mean, the next mayor of New York is probably a communist. Okay. Now, when I say probably, I mean, he's probably the next mayor. He is a communist. Okay. And people are voting for that. Okay. They're saying, yeah, please give me more of that. Well, he says that such arguments trouble me, however. The great political philosophy professor Leo Strauss insisted that it is a grave mistake to presume to understand important political philosophers better than they understood themselves, unless one had already put in the hard work necessary to understand them as they understood themselves. Perhaps this good advice can be demonstrated, I thought, he said, and applied as well to Elizabeth Warren and Rachel Maddow as an artistical and John Locke. If we make that effort, an effort to understand committed liberals as they understand themselves, then we have to understand them as people who, by their own account, get up every morning and ask, what can I do today so that there's a little less suffering in the world? To wrestle with that question, the question of liberal compassion, is the purpose of his latest book. And again, this was 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. And it was called The Pity Party. Now, he says all conservatives are painfully aware that liberal activists and publicists have successfully weaponized compassion. I am a liberal, radio host Garrison Keillor wrote in 2004 that liberalism is the politics of kindness. He said that President Obama said this: kindness covers all of my political beliefs. When I think about what I'm fighting for, what gets me up every single day, that captures it and just about as much as anything. Kindness is empathy. That sense that I have a stake in your success, that I'm going to make sure just because my daughters are doing well, that's not enough. I want your kids to do well also. And empathetic kindness is what binds us together and how we've always moved forward based on the idea that we have a stake in each other's success, unquote. Now, let me stop there for a second. That's a perfect Obama quote. He wants the power so that he wants you to give him the power so that he can help you succeed. And it's not, hey, we want you to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and succeed or do whatever it takes to succeed. Or it's not that at all. It's, hey, I want to help you succeed. It's about him. Anyway, let's continue. He says, well, if liberalism is the politics of kindness, it follows that its adversary is conservatism. If the politics of cruelty, greed, and callousness would be conservative, according to him. Liberals have never been reluctant to connect those dots. And in 1936, Franklin Roosevelt said, divine justice weighs the sins of the cold-blooded and the sins of the warm-hearted in different scales. Better than the occasional faults of a government that lives in a spirit of charity than the consistent omissions of a government frozen in the ice of its own indifference, he would say. In 1984, the Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill, he called President Reagan an evil man who has no care and no concern for the working class of America and the future generations. He's cold. He's mean. He's got ice water for blood. Yeah. I mean, the liberals are using that exact same playbook today on Trump. But anyway, he says that in 2013, Paul Krugman column accused conservatives of taking positive glee in inflicting further suffering on the already miserable. They were, he wrote, inflicted by an almost pathological mean-spiritedness. If you're an American and you're down on your luck, these people don't want to help you. They want to give you an extra kick, unquote. Some small d politics is Darwinian, like Darwin, arguments and rhetoric that work, that impress voters and intimidate opponents, are used again and again. So again, what he's saying is, if you throw that kind of stuff out there long enough, people are going to believe it, and they're just and they're going to vote for you because, hey, they want to vote for the kind people, right? Not the cruel people that would want to take your grandmother's paycheck and Social Security away, right? So he goes on. He says a first step in this direction is to note a political anomaly pointed out by Mitchell Daniels, a former Republican governor of Indiana. Daniels contended that disciplining government according to measured, probable performance and effective spending ought to be a completely philosophical, neutral objective. So again, what this guy is saying is that if you really are about compassion, which is what liberals say they are, if they're really about compassion, then don't you think that they would want every dollar that comes into the government to actually be spent helping the needy? But they don't. They I mean, look at Doge and look at all the things that are happening today. I mean, we're uncovering scandal after scandal after scandal of dollars that are just being wasted and thrown away on things that don't matter, and people that are just using it as a slush fund. He says the clear implication that many liberals are not especially troubled if government dollars that could help poor people are squandered strikes me as truly interesting and important, given that liberals are people who, number one, have built a welfare state that is now the biggest thing government does in America, and number two, want to regard themselves as being regarded by others as compassionate empathizers determined to alleviate suffering. It should follow that nothing would preoccupy them more than making sure that the welfare state machine is functioning at maximum capacity. When it isn't, after all, the sacred mission of alleviating preventable suffering is inevitably degraded. In fact, however, liberals do not seem at all concerned about whether the machine they built and want to keep expanding is running well. For inflation-adjusted per capita federal welfare state spending to increase by 254% from 1977 to 2013 without a corresponding dramatic reduction in poverty, and for liberals to react to this phenomenon by taking the position that our welfare state only, the welfare state's only real defect is that it is insufficiently generous rather than insufficiently effective, suggests a basic problem. To take a recent vivid example, the Obama administration, this is, again, remember, this is 10 years ago, the Obama administration had 3.5 years from the signing of the Affordable Care Act to launch of the governmentcare.gov website. It's hard to reconcile the latter debacle with the image of liberals lying awake at night, tormented by the thought the government should be doing more to reduce suffering. A sympathetic columnist, E.J. Doan, wrote of the website Crash and Burn debut, there's a lesson here that liberals apparently need to learn over and over. Good intentions without proper administration can undermine even the most noble of goals. You see, this is part of the problem, because they claim they want compassion, and you can have all the compassion if that's, let's just for argument's sake say it's true. You can have all the compassion in the world, but if you're doing nothing about it and you're wasting the money that's supposed to be going toward it, that's not compassion. That's not compassion at all. That's selfishness. He says that defect, I came to think, can be explained as follows. The problem with liberalism may be that no one knows how to get the government to do the benevolent things liberals want it to do. Or maybe, at least in some cases, that it just isn't possible for the government to bring about what liberals want it to accomplish. As the leading writers in the public interest began demonstrating almost 50 years ago, the intended beneficial consequences of social policies are routinely overwhelmed by the unintended harmful consequences they trigger. It may also be, as conservatives have long argued, that activating liberal goals, no matter how humane they sound, requires kinds and degrees of government coercion fundamentally incompatible with a government created by secure citizens' inalienable rights. So, in other words, what he's saying here is that maybe, let's just for argument's sake say that liberals are really trying to be compassionate. Okay, that is their driving motivation and goal. Maybe what they're trying to do can't be done through government, and I would agree. You show me a government program that operates better than what can be done through the private sector. I'm waiting. There isn't one, and that's why I'm waiting, because you can't answer and give me an example. And so, yes, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt, you can't do it. And once you start trying, then you start to run over people's rights in trying to do so. He says, I don't reject any of those possibilities or deny the evidence of logic deducted in support of each. But my assessment is how the liberal project has been justified in words and rendered in deeds leads me to a different explanation of why. Under the auspice of liberal government, things have a way of turning out so badly. I conclude that the machinery created by the politics of kindness doesn't work very well in the sense of being economical, adaptable, and above all, effective. Because the liberals who build, operate, defend, and seek to expand this machine don't really care whether it works very well and are, on balance, happier it fails than when it succeeds. And I want to stop here and say I think he's got it on the head right here. This is a great point. Okay, let's just take like the homeless situation. If you look at homeless spending, whether it be federal government, whether it be local, state, whatever, if you look at, let's just take that as an example. There are millions and billions of dollars spent on homeless. If you were to calculate it out per homeless, you would be shocked. Okay, but let's just take that and say all of this money going toward to try to help solve the homeless problem in wherever you live. If you look at that issue, you would think it should be solved. There's a ton of money being spent there, but that is getting worse. The problem is getting worse. Why? Because if it got better, that government problem would go away. That government program would go away. Those federal dollars, those state dollars, those county dollars, whatever, those dollars, those government dollars would go away, and those people would be out of a job. So their motivation is to not solve the problem. The problem gets worse. And so, yes, the success of a program, of a governmental program, is really how is that program expanding, right? Oh, we're expanding our program. A leader will say, "Look how much dollars we're getting now. We need more, but we're getting at least more, and we're growing. So that means we're helping, right?" No, it doesn't. It means the program the problem is growing, and you have no motivation to solve it. Your motivation is to make it bigger so you can get more dollars. Okay. He goes in and he says further, he says, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the Latin word compassion means literally suffering together with another. It's the feeling or emotion when a person is moved by the suffering or distress of another and by the desire to relieve it. Note that suffering together does not mean suffering identically. The compassionate person does not become hungry when he meets or thinks about a hungry person, or sick in the presence of the sick. Rather, the compassion means we are affected by other suffering, a distress that motivates us to alleviate it. He quotes here. He says, quote, when the strength of an expansive soul makes me identify myself with my fellow, and I feel that I am, so I speak to him, it is in order not to suffer that I do not want him to suffer. I am interested in him for love of myself. So he says we can see the problem. The whole point of compassion is for the empathizers to feel better when awareness of another suffering provoke unease. But the ultimate purpose does not guarantee that the empathies will fare better. So again, he hits on another good point, I think, here. He hits on the fact that liberals most often want that credit, they want that feeling, they want that emotion of helping others. Okay. Again, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt that that's really their motivation. Okay. And so you take a liberal, and he's motivated to help. He directs dollars to do that. He helps increase our taxes, whatever the case may be, and those dollars, presumably, because that doesn't happen very often, but presumably that those dollars go toward whatever program he's trying to do to alleviate suffering, right? Well, the problem is that it doesn't matter if it is successful or not, because the simple fact that he's trying is good enough in the mind of the liberal. The simple fact that he cares is good enough in the mind of the liberal. The simple fact that he has this as his motivating goal or stated goal is enough in the mind of the liberal. He said, this guy says, indeed, if you're trying to prove your heart is in the right place, the failure of government programs to alleviate suffering is not only an acceptable outcome, but in many ways the preferred one. Sometimes empathizers, such as those in the helping profession, acquire a vested interest in the study and the management and the perpetuation of as opposed to the solution and resulting disappearance of sufferers' problems. This is why so many government programs initiated to conquer a problem end up, indeed, colonizing it by building sprawling settlements where the helpers and the helped are endlessly, increasingly codependent. See, this is a really good point. It is in the mind of the liberal so often that, hey, I don't really want the problem to go away. I just want to be seen as trying to bring a solution. That's selfish. He says that it follows then that the answer to the question of how liberals who profess to be anguished over other people's suffering can be so weirdly complacent regarding wasteful, misdirected, and above all, ineffective government programs created to relieve that suffering is that liberals care about helping much less than they care about caring. Let me read that again, because that's really good. He says, it follows then that the answer to the question of how liberals who profess to be anguished about other people's suffering can be so weirdly complacent regarding wasteful, misdirected, and above all, ineffective government programs created to relieve that suffering is that liberals care about helping much less than they care about caring. Because compassion gives me a self-regarding reason to care about your suffering. It's more important for me to do something than to accomplish something. So good. Once I've voted for, given a speech about, written an editorial endorsing, or held forth at a dinner party on the salutary generosity of some program to address your problem, my work is done. And I can feel the rush of my own pious reaction. There's no need, he says, to stick around for the complex, frustrating, mundane work of making sure the program that made me feel better just by being established and praised has actually alleviated your suffering. Man, that's good. That is so good. And that is the truth, is it not? So oftentimes we see these, quote, compassionate people just back everything that doesn't work and just wastes money. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them because they're seen as the good guys. They're the compassionate ones. And yet, that's not really true compassion now, is it? I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. You can go to our YouTube channel. I would love for that to happen. Please like us, share. That always helps. And thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.